chain struck the frozen ground as a whip cracked through the night air. A woman, pregnant, trembling, her back already raw with blood, collapsed onto the dirt. Overseers roared with laughter, their shadows stretching long in the torchlight, boots pressing against her swollen belly. They believed her beaten, broken, silenced. But within that fainting body burned a fury stronger than iron. Her name was Sophia, and when she rose, 5 overseers would bleed before the Texas sun set. The year was 1827, and Texas was still a rough frontier land, a territory torn between nations, ambitions, and greed. But for the enslaved, it was not politics that defined life, it was chains. On the sprawling Harrison Plantation, hundreds of acres of cotton and cane grew tall, feeding the wealth of a single white family while breaking the bodies of those who labored without rest. Among the enslaved was a woman named Sophia. She had never known freedom. Born in chains, her very first breath was drawn inside a wooden cabin built not for comfort, but containment. Her mother, Mary, held her tightly that night, whispering prayers over her newborn daughter, though she knew what fate awaited her. Sophia would be raised not as a child of joy, but as property. From her earliest memories, Sophia's world was ruled by the whip. She remembered the iron sound of the overseer's boots at dawn, the clang of shackles, the barked orders to rise before the sun touched the horizon. As a child of 7, she carried water to the fields, stumbling under the weight of buckets. By 10, she was forced into field labor, her small fingers bleeding as she plucked cotton under the blistering Texas heat. The Harrison Plantation was notorious for cruelty. Its master, Charles Harrison, was a man obsessed with profit. He spoke of efficiency, of order, of obedience, as though people were machines to be worked until they broke. His wife, Eleanor, held a different kind of power, refined in manner, venomous in spirit. She loved to stroll the fields in gowns of silk, her parasol shading her from the sun, her pale lips curling as she picked out slaves to punish. For Eleanor, punishment was a spectacle, a form of entertainment. But it was the overseers who carried out that cruelty with eager hands. They strutted across the plantation like kings of the soil, their whips always ready, their tempers quick to flare. They believed fear was the strongest tool of control. Children, women, men, it mattered little. All felt the sting of leather, the crush of boots, the iron of chains. Sophia learned early that survival depended on silence. Keep your head bowed, your voice low, your step steady. Yet even in her silence, a fire began to grow. She remembered the day her mother was dragged into the yard and lashed for daring to teach Sophia the letters of the alphabet, scratched into dirt with a stick. Eleanor had ordered it, declaring that a slave with words is a dangerous thing. As the whip cracked across Mary's back, Sophia's young eyes filled with tears. But inside, anger took root. By the time she reached womanhood, Sophia's body was strong, shaped by endless toil. Her back carried scars like a map of her suffering, each line a story of pain. Yet her spirit, though scarred, remained unbroken. In the nights, when work was done, she joined the others in the quarters, laughing softly, singing hymns in whispers, sharing scraps of food and fragments of hope. These small moments of humanity kept the fire alive. It was in those shadows that Sophia met Daniel, a man from a neighboring plantation. Daniel was tall, with shoulders broad from chopping cane, and eyes that carried both sorrow and defiance. They spoke in hurried whispers, their conversations stolen in passing moments. He told her of freedom, of rivers that flowed north, of places where chains did not exist. His words lit something in her heart. Love, fragile and fleeting, bloomed between them. When Sophia discovered she was carrying Daniel's child, she felt both fear and joy. Fear because she knew what awaited pregnant women on plantations. Heavier burdens, fewer allowances, no mercy. Joy because within her grew life, a symbol of love in a world built on cruelty. She prayed that her child would inherit not her chains, but Daniel's dream of freedom. But joy was short-lived under Eleanor's gaze. When the mistress discovered Sophia's pregnancy, she was livid. "A belly is no excuse for idleness," she declared coldly. the fields will not harvest themselves. From that day forward, Sophia was forced to work even harder. Overseers delighted in tormenting her, lashing her when she faltered, mocking her swollen stomach as she stumbled beneath baskets of cotton. They treated her body not as a vessel of life, but as a burden to be punished. Still, Sophia endured. Each lash she bore, each insult she swallowed, each drop of blood she shed, she endured for her child. She whispered to the life within her, promising survival, promising vengeance. The Harrison Plantation was a place of constant terror. Slaves whispered stories of overseers' cruelties to one another, warnings carried like scars. One man was chained to a post for days without food. Another was buried alive up to his neck as a lesson for the rest. A woman who tried to flee was dragged back, her feet burned so she could never run again. These horrors etched themselves into Sophia's mind, not only as warnings, but as debts. Debts she vowed one day to repay. Yet amid this cruelty, the calendar still marked time. Seasons changed, and with them came the rituals of the white masters. Christmas meant feasts in the big house, tables groaning with food, laughter spilling out of windows while slaves shivered in their cabins. New Year's brought fresh records of quotas, harsher rules, renewed promises of obedience. The church, meant to preach salvation, was twisted into another weapon, sermons used to demand submission. Slaves, obey your masters. Sophia listened to those sermons, her face impassive, but inside, she seethed. By late autumn of 1827, Sophia's belly was heavy, her body weary, yet her spirit was sharper than ever. She had lived her entire life beneath whips and chains, seen her people slaughtered, poisoned, hanged, and buried alive. She had been whipped until she fainted, mocked as she bled, but inside her heart, the ember of resistance glowed bright. And soon, it would ignite into a fire that would consume the overseers who laughed at her suffering. Because Sophia was no longer content to endure. She was preparing to rise. And when she did, the Harrison Plantation would never forget her name. Winter in Texas brought no mercy. The winds cut through the fields like knives, but the enslaved were still driven from their cabins at dawn, bare feet sinking into frozen mud. For Sophia, heavy with child, the cold was another torment layered upon her swollen body. Yet the overseers did not relent. If anything, their cruelty sharpened as the season grew harsher. Among them, 5 men emerged as her chief tormentors. Rufus Clay, the overseer who had lashed her since childhood, never missed an opportunity to remind her of her scars. He mocked her belly, calling her breeder, and sneered that her child would be born in chains. Jonas Pike, broad-shouldered with a cruel smirk, struck her across the face whenever she faltered, delighting in watching her collapse. Samuel Griggs, silent and cold, favored iron chains. He wrapped wrists, ankles, and necks in their bite, binding slaves before punishments. Henry Lowe, perpetually drunk, lashed at anyone near, his whip flying wild, leaving stripes across backs, arms, even faces. And Thomas Yates, the youngest, believed cruelty proved his strength. He was eager, hungry, and reckless with power. Together, they made Sophia's every step a battlefield. Day after day, she was ordered to carry heavy baskets of cotton, her belly straining under the load. When she stumbled, Rufus's whip snapped. When she slowed, Jonas struck her legs with his cane. When she gasped for air, Samuel tightened his chains around her wrists until her skin split. The overseers laughed, feeding off one another's cruelty like wolves circling prey. The other slaves watched in silence, fear choking their throats. They whispered in the quarters at night, speaking of Sophia with both pity and awe. She should not survive this, they murmured. Yet she does. Some feared she would die, her unborn child lost beneath the lash. Others began to see her endurance as a sign that perhaps something greater stirred within her. But endurance had its limits. One morning, just weeks before Christmas, Eleanor Harrison herself appeared in the fields. She watched Sophia struggle under a basket so heavy she nearly buckled. With a sharp motion of her gloved hand, she ordered the overseers forward. "Drive her harder," she commanded coldly. A swollen belly cannot be allowed to slow the harvest. Rufus grinned as though granted permission for a sport. The whip cracked across Sophia's shoulders once, twice, 3 times. Blood streaked her back. The fourth blow caught her across the side, sending her sprawling. The basket crashed beside her, cotton scattering like snow. The overseers roared with laughter. Henry Lowe stumbled forward, drunk, pressing his boot against her belly. "The brat will come early if I stomp hard enough," he slurred. Sophia gasped, clutching at the earth, her eyes blurring with pain and fury. But Eleanor's voice cut through the air. "Enough. Do not kill her. Yet. Let her work. Let her prove that even with life inside her, she belongs to us." The overseers pulled her upright, chains dragging at her wrists. Blood ran down her spine. Her breath came shallow, ragged. Yet as she met Eleanor's gaze, Sophia did not bow her head. For the first time, she locked eyes with the mistress. For the briefest flicker, Eleanor's parasol stilled. Then she turned away, muttering, "She will break soon." But Sophia did not break. Instead, something shifted inside her. Each lash, each boot, each jeer was no longer just suffering. It was fuel. She began to measure the overseers not as tormentors, but as enemies. She memorized the way Rufus always looped his whip before striking, the way Jonas leaned on his left leg, the way Henry's drunken sway left him unbalanced, the way Thomas's eagerness blinded him to danger, the way Samuel's silence masked his habits. She learned them as one studies prey. At night, in the quarters, she lay awake while others slept. The winter wind howled through the cracks, but she barely felt it. She whispered to her unborn child, "We will not suffer forever. I will make them bleed." The cruelty grew worse in the days before Christmas. The Harrisons planned a feast, one of those lavish displays where the big house overflowed with food, wine, and laughter. For the enslaved, it meant longer hours, heavier loads, sharper punishments. The overseers took their frustrations out on Sophia, driving her until her legs trembled and her body nearly collapsed. On one bitter night, the overseers dragged her into the yard. Snow fell in light flakes, dusting the ground white. Rufus ordered her tied to a post. The others gathered, grinning. "A lesson," Rufus declared. The whip sang through the air, striking her again and again until her knees buckled. Jonas laughed, tossing snow into her wounds. Henry shouted drunken curses. Thomas spat in her face. Samuel, silent as always, tightened the chains when her body sagged. She fainted, her body limp, blood staining the snow. The overseers left her there, certain she would not rise again. But by dawn, Sophia stirred. With torn skin and broken strength, she crawled back to the quarters. The others gasped, some weeping at the sight of her shredded back. Yet Sophia's eyes blazed, not with despair, but with a cold fire that frightened even those who loved her. She whispered one sentence that spread through the quarters like a secret flame. "They will pay." The words carried weight. Some dismissed them as the delirium of a broken woman. Others believed they were a prophecy. For Sophia herself, they were a vow. Every lash she had suffered, every laugh that echoed in her ears, every drop of blood that soaked the earth, she carried them now not as burdens, but as weapons waiting to be unleashed. The overseers thought they had broken her. What they had done instead was awaken the storm. And soon, that storm would strike back at them, one by one. The whipping that left Sophia fainting in the snow should have ended her story. Most expected she would lose the child, or that her body would give out under the torment. Yet, against every cruelty, Sophia endured. Her wounds closed into fresh scars, and her belly continued to swell. But something within her had shifted permanently. She no longer moved as merely a victim. She moved with quiet calculation. Each day in the fields became more than labor, it became observation. She memorized overseers' routines, their tempers, their weaknesses. She noted where the tools were stored, where chains hung, where torches lay stacked for night patrols. She listened to whispers in the quarters, piecing together every rumor, every secret. Sophia had reached the point where survival was not enough. Now, she hungered for revenge. The moment came in December, on the night of the Christmas feast. The Harrisons had invited neighboring planters, their house blazing with candlelight, laughter spilling into the cold air. Tables groaned under roasted meats, candied fruits, and flowing wine. In the fields, the enslaved bent double under last-minute tasks, driven by overseers eager to show efficiency to their masters. The air stank of smoke, sweat, and anticipation. Sophia's body screamed with exhaustion, yet her mind was sharp. She watched as Henry Lowe staggered drunk by the barn, nearly dropping his whip. She saw Jonas Pike leaning against the post, laughing with Rufus about breaking the breeder once the feast was over. She glimpsed Thomas Yates bragging to another slave boy that he'd been promised Sophia for discipline practice in the new year. Samuel, as ever, watched silently from the shadows, a chain swinging from his hand. For weeks, Sophia had endured with one thought burning in her chest. The overseers believed themselves untouchable, but they bled like any other man, and she would be the one to make them bleed. That night, while the masters feasted, the quarters buzzed with whispers. Some prayed for strength to endure another year. Others prayed for escape. Sophia remained silent, crouched in the corner, her hands resting on her belly. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, steady, and terrifyingly certain. They have beaten me as though I am less than human. They laughed as I fainted, as they pressed their boots into the life inside me. Tonight, I will answer. The room went still. Some gasped, others begged her to stay silent. An old woman shook her head. Child, vengeance is death. Sophia's eyes lifted, shining with something that silenced them all. Death has walked with me every day of my life. If it finds me tonight, let it find me fighting. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then a young man whispered, If you strike, strike hard. Don't miss. Sophia nodded. She already knew. The turning point began with fire. While overseers caroused outside, drinking stolen whiskey and boasting of their cruelty, Sophia slipped into the shadows of the barn. Her body ached with every step, her back burning with old wounds, her child pressing heavy inside her. Yet her hands were steady. She found the oil lamp where it always hung, its flame flickering. She tipped it carefully, letting the oil spill into straw piled high. The fire caught quickly, licking upward, hungry and alive. She did not stay to watch it spread. She moved with silent purpose, her mind already fixed on the overseers. Henry Lowe was the first. He stumbled from the smoke-filled barn, cursing, half drunk. Sophia stepped from the shadows, gripping a heavy wooden beam she had snatched from the tool shed. He sneered, thinking her weak. What are you doing out, breeder? He slurred. Sophia did not answer. The beam swung hard, cracking across his skull. Henry staggered, blood spilling into his beard. He laughed drunkenly, swiping at her, but she swung again, this time with all the fury of years of torment. The crack echoed. Henry fell to the dirt, unmoving. Sophia stood over him, chest heaving, realizing she had drawn first blood. The fire raged behind her, and panic spread. Overseers shouted, slaves scattered, masters screamed from the house. But Sophia's focus never wavered. Jonas Pike rushed toward the barn, shouting orders, his whip in hand. When he spotted Sophia, his grin spread. Come to beg mercy? He jeered. Sophia's grip tightened on the beam. No, she answered. Before Jonas could laugh, she lunged. The beam struck his arm, knocking the whip loose. He grabbed at her, but she swung again, splintering wood against his jaw. Blood sprayed, his teeth clattering to the dirt. He fell back, stunned. Sophia seized the whip, cracking it across his face with such force the sound split the night. Jonas screamed, clutching his eyes. 2 overseers down. 3 remained. Rufus Clay appeared, rage twisting his scarred face. He had lashed her since childhood, carved her skin into maps of suffering. Now he charged, his whip uncoiling like a snake. I should have killed you years ago, he roared. Sophia's fury boiled over. And I should have killed you first. The whip lashed her arm, tearing flesh, but she did not falter. She lunged, driving the whip's handle into his throat. Rufus choked, stumbling back. She struck again, until he collapsed, gasping in the dirt. The overseers who had laughed at her fainting body now lay broken, bleeding, or blind. But two remained, Thomas Yates and Samuel Griggs. Thomas, young and reckless, charged with blind rage. He grabbed a torch, swinging it wildly. Flames licked the air, shadows dancing across his twisted grin. "I'll end you," he screamed. Sophia did not retreat. She caught the torch with her bare hands, flame scorching her skin, and shoved it hard into Thomas's chest. His shirt ignited, fire devouring him. His screams tore the night as he staggered, burning. He collapsed, rolling in dirt, but the flames clung, consuming him until silence fell. And then there was one, Samuel Griggs. Silent, cold, his chain swinging. He stepped forward, eyes like stone. Unlike the others, he did not laugh, did not taunt. He simply wrapped the chain around his fists, preparing. The two circled, fire roaring around them, screams echoing from the house. Sophia's body trembled with exhaustion, her skin torn, her belly heavy. Yet she stood tall. "You think chains will hold me?" she hissed. Samuel lunged, the chain snapping like a whip. Sophia dodged, but the iron bit into her shoulder. She staggered, pain exploding. Samuel advanced again, relentless. But Sophia caught the chain, pulling hard. It tore her palms, but she yanked with all the strength she had left. Samuel stumbled forward, off balance. Sophia swung the chain back at him, striking across his temple. Blood gushed. He fell to his knees. Sophia wrapped the chain around his throat, pulling tighter and tighter until his struggle ceased. Silence. All 5 overseers had fallen, bleeding, broken, or dead. Sophia, pregnant, whipped, and nearly broken, had risen and made them bleed. It was the turning point, not just of her life, but of the Harrison Plantation. Fire roared, overseers lay destroyed, and whispers of her defiance would soon spread far beyond Texas soil. What came next would be chaos, vengeance, and blood. But in this moment, Sophia stood amid the flames, her chains falling loose, her body trembling, her spirit unshackled. The storm she had promised had arrived. The night sky over the Harrison Plantation glowed red. Fire climbed into the heavens, black smoke rolling like thunderclouds, the crackle of burning timber drowning out the Christmas laughter that had once spilled from the great house. The overseers, the men who had mocked, beaten, and bled Sophia, now lay scattered across the dirt. Henry Lowe's skull was caved. Jonas Pike screamed blind in the shadows. Rufus Clay gasped through crushed lungs. Thomas Yates burned alive, and Samuel Griggs lay lifeless, the chain that had once bound others now tight around his throat. But the battle was not over. The chaos had only begun. The flames from the barn leapt to the stables, horses shrieking in panic, hooves pounding as they broke free and thundered into the night. Dogs barked, masters shouted, and slaves scattered in every direction, some fleeing into the woods, others frozen by fear. Sophia stood in the center of it all, her body trembling with exhaustion, her swollen belly pulling her downward. Her arms and back were streaked with blood, both hers and theirs, her palms torn raw from gripping chains and wood. Yet her eyes, those eyes glowed like the fire itself. She was no longer the woman they had whipped to fainting. She was a force. The overseers had fallen, but the Harrisons remained. Charles Harrison burst from the great house, pistol in hand, his face twisted in rage. Eleanor followed, her silk gown dragging through the dirt, her voice sharp and shrill. "The barn, the stables, stop the flames," she shrieked. Servants and drunken guests stumbled behind them, chaos unraveling the false dignity of their Christmas feast. Charles spotted Sophia standing in the yard, the chain still gripped in her torn hands. His face went pale, then red with fury. "You!" he roared, raising his pistol. "You dare!" The shot rang out, echoing across the fields. but Sophia had already moved. The ball tore through her arm, flesh burning, blood spilling. She staggered but did not fall. The chain in her hand snapped upward, wrapping the pistol's barrel, yanking it free. The weapon clattered into the dirt. Charles lunged, but Sophia swung hard, the chain striking his face. Bone cracked, blood sprayed, and the master of the Harrison Plantation stumbled backward, screaming. Eleanor shrieked louder than the fire itself. "Kill her! Kill her now!" She seized a servant by the arm, shoving him forward. But the man hesitated, terror in his eyes. The line between master and slave wavered in that moment, the fire's glow revealing truths long hidden. The slaves were many, the masters few. And Sophia had shown that overseers could bleed. Sophia staggered forward, blood dripping from her arm, her belly aching. Her voice, hoarse but steady, cut through the roar of flames and screams. "Every lash, every chain, every child you stole. Tonight, it ends." Her words struck like the crack of thunder. Slaves who had cowered now lifted their heads. Men and women stared at her, trembling, not with fear, but with something new. Something fierce. Charles, clutching his broken face, scrambled to his feet. "You'll all hang for this," he bellowed. "Hanged, every one of you, buried alive in chains." But his threats carried no weight anymore. The overseers who once enforced them now lay scattered in ruin. The fear that had bound the slaves was unraveling. Sophia advanced, chain dripping blood, her shadow stretching long in the firelight. Eleanor backed away, her silk gown catching embers, tiny sparks devouring the hem. She screamed, slapping at the flames, stumbling into the dirt. Her parasol, once a symbol of cruel elegance, ignited, burning to ash. Charles tried to rally, shouting for order, but panic had swallowed the plantation. Guests fled into the woods, clutching their coats. Servants dropped trays of food, scattering. The feast Eleanor had so carefully prepared rotted in the heat, wine spilling like blood across the tablecloths. Sophia's steps carried her toward the big house. For years, it had loomed as a fortress of cruelty, a monument to wealth built on suffering. Now its walls quivered in firelight, fragile, vulnerable. Inside, screams rose as flames licked the drapes, devouring fine furniture, choking the air with smoke. Sophia stepped through the doorway, the chain dragging across the floorboards with a metallic scrape. The grand hall, once a place of laughter and commands, became her battlefield. Charles staggered back up the stairs, blood dripping from his face, pistol now useless. "Stop her!" he shouted, but no one came. Those who once obeyed his every command now hid or fled. Eleanor clutched the banister, her eyes wide with horror. "You'll burn for this," she shrieked. Sophia's voice was calm, chilling. "So will you." With a surge of strength, she swung the chain upward, smashing the chandelier. Glass shattered, candles toppled, fire spilling across the polished wood. The hall erupted in flames, smoke curling upward, choking the air. Guests screamed from within, their gowns and coats catching fire as they fled. Sophia advanced up the stairs. Her legs trembled, her body heavy with child, but nothing slowed her. Charles stumbled backward, retreating into the master's chambers. He fumbled for a sword mounted on the wall, pulling it free with shaking hands. Sophia stepped into the room, the firelight glinting against the blade. "You think steel will save you?" she whispered. Charles lunged, slashing wildly. The blade nicked her side, blood seeping, but Sophia pressed forward, catching the sword with the chain, twisting it from his grasp. The blade clattered to the floor. She wrapped the chain around his neck, pulling tight. Charles gasped, clawing at her arms, eyes bulging. "Every scar on my back is yours," she hissed into his ear. "Tonight, I give them back." She yanked harder. Charles choked, legs thrashing, then went still. The master of the Harrison Plantation fell to the ground, lifeless, chains finally his own. Eleanor's screams rose higher, shrill and desperate. She backed against the window, flames surrounding her, her silk gown ablaze. "You devil!" she shrieked. You'll damn us all." Sophia stared at her, breathing hard, her belly heavy, her arms shaking with exhaustion. For a moment, silence stretched between them, mistress and slave, tormentor and tormented. Then Eleanor's gown ignited fully, fire racing upward. She shrieked, clawing at her burning skin, stumbling backward through the window. Glass shattered. Her body fell into the night, crashing onto the dirt below. The mistress was no more. The house roared with flames, timbers cracking, roof collapsing. Slaves poured into the yard, some clutching children, some holding tools, all staring at Sophia as she stepped out of the inferno. Her skin was scorched, her arm bleeding, her breath ragged. Yet she stood tall, the chain still clutched in her hand. The overseers were dead. The masters were gone. The Harrison Plantation burned, and at its center stood Sophia, the woman they had whipped to fainting, pregnant and bloody, now risen as their scourge. The slaves gathered around her, eyes wide with awe and fear. Some wept openly, unable to believe what they had witnessed. Others knelt, trembling. Sophia raised her hand, her voice hoarse but commanding. "Run," she told them. "Into the night. Find freedom. Do not let them chain you again." The words spread like a commandment. Mothers clutched children and fled into the woods. Men broke the fences, leading horses away. Young boys and girls ran with nothing but the clothes on their backs, their feet pounding toward the unknown. Sophia remained in the yard, fire raging behind her, smoke blotting the stars. She had struck her vengeance, spilled overseers' blood, toppled her masters, and shattered the fear that had ruled the Harrison Plantation for decades. But she knew the night was not the end. The neighbors would come. The militia would ride. Blood would answer blood. Still, in that burning moment, she had claimed something no lash could take from her. Power. Her voice, though raw, carried across the chaos, the final cry of her vengeance. No more chains. The words rang into the night, louder than fire, louder than screams, louder than death itself. And with them, Sophia's name was etched into history, not as a victim, but as the scourge who rose, pregnant and bleeding, to make 5 overseers fall and a plantation burn. The Harrison Plantation was gone by dawn. Where once stood proud white columns and rolling fields of cotton, only smoldering ash remained. Blackened beams jutted like broken bones against the rising sun, smoke curling upward as if carrying the cries of the dead into heaven. The overseers' bodies lay scattered, twisted, burned, some silent, others dragged away by scavengers in the night. Charles Harrison, the master who had once ruled with whip and pistol, now lay lifeless in the chamber where he had believed himself untouchable. Eleanor Harrison's corpse, charred and broken from her fall, was buried beneath shards of glass and ash. The Christmas feast she had prepared, her proudest night, had been swallowed by fire and ruin. But Sophia still lived, barefoot and bloodstained, her body weak from loss and her belly swollen with unborn life. She stood at the edge of the fields as dawn broke. Around her, dozens of slaves, men, women, children, looked to her in silence. They were free, but freedom was not yet safe. The fire had bought them hours, maybe a day, before riders from nearby plantations came. Sophia knew this. She knew vengeance traveled fast, and white men would not let the Harrison legacy fall without blood. Yet for one fleeting moment, standing in the smoking ruins, they felt a freedom few had ever known. The chains were gone. The overseers were no more. And the mistress and master had been dragged into the same dirt they once forced others to kneel upon. Sophia's voice, though ragged, carried across the quiet. "Run," she whispered again. "Run before the dogs come." They obeyed. Groups of slaves vanished into the tree line, scattering in every direction. Some carried small bundles, others carried nothing but children in their arms. They disappeared into swamps, into pine forests, toward the river, toward the hope of Mexico, where slavery had been outlawed. Their paths would be hunted, but at least they would not die in chains. Sophia, however, did not run. Her strength had carried her through whips, through labor, through vengeance, but now it left her. Her legs buckled, and she sank to her knees in the ash. She pressed her hands to her belly, trembling as the life inside her shifted. The baby, still alive, still fighting, just as its mother had. The smoke stung her eyes, but she kept them open. She wanted to see the plantation one last time, not as it had been, but as it was now, broken, burning, falling into dust. By mid-morning, the riders came. Men from neighboring estates, rifles in hand, faces twisted with fury. They found the ruins, the corpses, the blood. They found the house collapsed, the feast turned to charred bones and melted silver. And they found Sophia. She sat in the dirt, blood running down her arm. Her skin blistered from flame. The chain she had wielded lay across her lap, blackened and heavy. The riders surrounded her, voices spitting curses, calling her devil, calling her witch. They demanded to know where the others had fled, but Sophia did not answer. She sat silent, her face unreadable. One man, shaking with rage, lifted his rifle. "She's the one. She slaughtered them. Hang her now." But another stopped him. "No. Let her be tried. Let her hang before them all, so they see what comes of rebellion." And so, chains returned to her wrists. Chains heavier now, rusted, biting into burned skin. They dragged her to the nearest town, where the story of the burning spread like wildfire. White faces gathered, spitting, cursing, eager for vengeance. They called her a monster. They called her the Scourge of Christmas night. They called her Sophia the murderess. But among whispers, behind closed doors, another name grew. They called her hero. They called her the scourge of the overseers. They called her the flame of the Harrison Plantation. The trial was a mockery. Witnesses testified of fire, of murder, of blood. No one spoke of the years Sophia had bled beneath the whip. No one mentioned the unborn child. No one remembered the overseer's cruelty. The verdict was written before the trial began. Guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. The day of her execution, the town square swelled with bodies. Men in fine coats, women with parasols, children sitting on shoulders. They came not only to see Sophia die, but to remind the slaves among them what awaited rebellion. She was led to the gallows, her feet bare, her swollen belly heavy. The chain was gone, replaced by rope. Her hands were bound. Her back was covered in scars, each lash visible even in the morning light. A hush fell as she climbed the steps. Sophia did not bow her head. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes steady. She saw slaves in the back, their faces hidden, their tears silent. She saw overseers who had survived other plantations, their jaws clenched. She saw masters clutching wives' hands, muttering of devils and demons. The preacher asked if she had last words. Sophia raised her head, voice carrying, clear and sharp as broken glass. "They chained me. They whipped me. They took my children, but they could not take my soul. I was born in chains, but I die free." The crowd gasped. Some spat curses. Others trembled. The slaves in the back closed their eyes, holding her words like treasure. The hood was pulled over her head. The rope tightened, and as the lever fell, Sophia's final cry seemed to echo, not from her mouth, but from the hearts of those who heard her. No more chains. The body of Sophia swung in the Texas sun, but her story did not end there. The slaves who fled that night carried whispers of her vengeance into the swamps, into the mountains, into Mexico. They told the tale of the pregnant woman who made 5 overseers bleed, who burned her master's house, who faced death with fire still in her eyes. Children who grew in freedom heard her name as a legend. Elders told her story by firelight, each scar on their backs a reminder of the woman who dared to strike back. To the white world, Sophia was a warning. To the enslaved, she was hope. Her baby never saw light, for her life was cut short upon the gallows. Yet in a way, her child lived on, in every whisper of rebellion, in every chain broken, in every fire set against the night. The Harrison Plantation was rebuilt years later, but it never flourished the same. Some said the soil itself had been cursed by her blood. Fields withered, barns collapsed, and the land carried the smell of smoke long after the fire had died. and in the secret memory of the enslaved, Sophia became eternal. Even now, her story lingers in the silence of old fields. Walk the soil where the Harrisons once ruled, and you may still feel the heat of fire, hear the rattle of chains, smell the smoke of vengeance. Some swear they hear a woman's voice in the night, whispering the words she left behind. No more chains. It was more than defiance. It was prophecy. For in time, chains would break across the South. Not because of law alone, not because of mercy, but because of women and men like Sophia, who chose to bleed rather than bow, who rose in fire, who turned whips into weapons and fear into flame. She did not live to see freedom spread, but she made freedom live in others. And that is why, nearly 2 centuries later, the Scourge of Sophia is remembered, not as a woman who died, but as a woman who made 5 overseers bleed, who turned Christmas night into judgment, and who showed the world what vengeance looked like when chains break.